Tennessee, by all indications, should go 10-2. They are favorites against Kentucky this week. We'll get more into that as the week goes on, as the line settles. They'll be favorites against everybody they play for the remainder of the season, except for Georgia. Yet, Caleb, right now, Tennessee looks to be on the bubble of making the college football playoff. So vote on our poll question. If Tennessee's 10-2, do they make the college football playoff? Heather Dinich, who we've mentioned before, said earlier in the season that 11-1 for Tennessee is a lock to make it. 10-2 is not. On face value, and I've said this before, and I've said it on various radio programs across the state, a 10-2 SEC team should make the college football playoff. But what if there's a bundle of them? So let's look at this as it pertains to Tennessee specifically. And Cooper, you'll set us up. What should we do?
Cooper Mays here. Hit like and subscribe.
All right, Coop, what down?
Coop here. First down.
All right, first down is this. Have the Vols lost their flair without Josh Heupel's offensive firepower? Caleb?
Yes, and before we get to that, I just have to add some context because Tennessee did not move up at all in the AP poll. They stayed at number 7, which is why we're asking this. And also, Heather Dinich, in her playoff projections, has Tennessee as the last team in by significantly questioning their win over Alabama as their best win, but has Georgia all the way up at number 2, even though Georgia lost to Alabama. So that's why I'm questioning, is there an agenda against Tennessee right now? And so the question, have the Vols lost their flair because of their lack of offense? And I'm going to say yes. I predicted at the beginning of the year that ESPN would give Tennessee the benefit of the doubt because of the combination of the fan base and the ratings draw, but also who they would draw outside of their fan base because they'd be such a fun team to watch. Dave, let's be honest. Tennessee's not a draw for a casual fan right now with the way they play. They're just not.
No, that's probably true. I would say this, though. Can I offset that by saying that Neyland Stadium would offset that if they could get a home game in Neyland Stadium? Is that enough to offset it? Because as much as you and I love the nuances of football, and we've talked about this before, I think the 85 Bears were as exciting, and they were all defensive-minded, were as exciting as that Patriots team that went 18-0 before they lost the Super Bowl. I mean, to me, I'm all about defense. So it doesn't affect what I think about the Vols, but it might affect those that are thinking of it as a TV show. So, Caleb, I would hate for a committee member to sit down and say, well, they virtually have the same record, but this team is defensive minded and this team isn't. Let's go with this team. That I just assume you flip a coin at that point. I think that's unfair and not the right way to judge college football playoff participants.
It's not, but you just pointed it out. It's a TV show, so I'm just going to okay, you're right. The value of Neyland Stadium stands out the most, and we can agree on that. I think we totally agree on that's the biggest value here. But let's just throw a hypothetical in for a minute, which is to say it comes down to the last week of the season. Right now, what you've seen with Tennessee against elite competition, neither side's going to be playing a home game because they're fighting for that 12th seed, that last spot, or that 11th seed. You know what I mean? So It's clear as day. You can't skew it for them to get a home game. It's so clear they don't deserve one. Say it comes down to that. And it's Tennessee or maybe an Ole Miss. As much as Tennessee has a better fan base, don't you think at this point, given how offensive-oriented Ole Miss is, that they'd be better for the TV show?
Yeah, well, but they're looking a little defensive-oriented as well. I don't think they're going to go as far or be as elite as Tennessee is.
Okay, what about Clemson?
So, yeah, then you get to other conferences, and I think that's where it gets interesting. David Michael says Tennessee's offense has to blow up on Kentucky this week, and it has to. Give me a little bit more context in that. Has to in that Kentucky's horrible, or has to get them in the college football playoff? I'm not sure I completely follow. What down is next, Coop? Oh, what down is next, Coop?
Cooper Mays here. Second down.
All right, thank you, Coop. Second down is this. Is there still a perception against UT based on the past decade plus? Okay. Now, I'm trying not to tread into third down, which I want to go to like right now. But the perception would be what? Is that they're just a bunch of losers because they were led by Jeremy Pruitt, Butch Jones, and Derek Dooley? Is that what you're getting at?
That whenever they're knocking on the door, they just do something to drop the ball completely. And there's a few bits of history to point this out, and it's not just the losers of coaches they've hired. But in 2015, they were picked to win the East, and they started the year in the preseason top 25 for the first time since 2008. What did they do? They choked away a 17-point lead to Oklahoma. They choked away a 2-touchdown lead to Florida, and then they choked away another 2-touchdown lead to Arkansas. If they just beat Florida, they win the East, so they blow it. The next year, their preseason top 10 team expected to win the East again and compete for the college football playoff. They start 5-0. They get to the top 10. The minute the respect comes, they lose 3 straight. Then 2022 happens. Tennessee loses to Georgia after beating Alabama. Nobody's really worried about the loss to Georgia. Everybody's looking at the playoff. They're like, you know what? Tennessee's probably still going to go. All they got to do is win out. What do? They go lay an egg against South Carolina. And I'll even say this goes all the way back to, Dave, I'll take it all the way back to 2001 when Tennessee beats Florida in the Swamp. And all they got to do is beat a much, much worse LSU team in the SEC title to go to the national championship, and they blow it. Ever since
now,
that
wait, you're going way far back.
I
choking over a generation still affects them?
Choking in the 21st century. I think Tennessee has choked too many times in the 21st century with a chance to compete for a title. And it started with that title game in 2001, but you let it go. But it's been a slow burn of things getting worse and worse and worse relative to expectations, that people can't bring themselves to trust Tennessee in this moment.
Okay, so what you're telling me is the College Football Playoff Committee is looking at Tennessee, even if they were to get to 10-2. And by the way, Derek, I'm not ruling out a Georgia win. Okay, I don't want to. We're basing this off the most likely outcome of the season.
Yeah, and you can't, if you're not going to rule out a Georgia win, you can't rule out a Vanderbilt loss. So
yeah, but what you said sold me last week.
Yeah,
and that was if they're going into that game with a college football playoff spot on the line, they're not going to slip.
They're not losing.
Once you said that, I was like, okay, let's try. Okay, so if that's the case that Tennessee chokes, then what you're telling me is that the college football playoff would be afraid of Tennessee what? Not choking against Vanderbilt, but choking in the playoff. And let's say they host a Penn State team in Neyland Stadium, and it's beautiful, and it's gorgeous, and Penn State beats them 50-10, is what you're telling me.
Yes.
That's what they would be afraid of.
They're very afraid of that.
Okay, but that's never going to happen with this defense. I would argue right now that of all the teams out there, Tennessee is most likely to play a close game in the college football playoff than anybody else. Now, on the chat board, not to interrupt you, on the chat board, a lot of people saying that Tennessee has to get it done this week against Kentucky. Do they have to have a blowout game? I wish that wasn't the case, but it just might be. Caleb, your thoughts as portions of the program brought to you by Hound Dogs of Knoxville. Champions look good in orange. HDKnoxville.com, HDKnoxville.com.
I think it would help them a lot if they put up a lot of points against Kentucky. Truth of the matter is they just need to keep winning until they get to Georgia. But if they can put up a lot of points, that really will help their case. Now, as far as the choking issue, look, Dave, I'm not saying this to just pile on. I'm really not, honestly. But, like, if you were constructing a playoff and you had to do it with the NFL and the selection committee, even if the Cowboys were a team that you would think belonged in, wouldn't you be a little concerned because of the past 30 years? Or do you say, no, it's not they choke, it's that they just haven't been good enough in these moments?
Apples and oranges. To me, they would garner big time TV numbers. So if it was a selection committee, you'd try to get them in, even if you just got the big numbers for one game and they choked.
Okay, well then what about the Aaron Judge led Yankees? Throw out the TV numbers real quick.
Okay.
Throw out the TV numbers. How about this? The Braves. Remember the Braves team that won like 14 straight division titles from 90s to the 2000s?
Yes.
And you had to construct an MLB playoff of like a bunch of teams, and the Braves were a fringe team to get in. You don't think the Braves' history of choking would work against them in that moment?
Well, that's kind of a scary good point. That's a scary good point. Portions of the program brought to you by Quality Tire Pro, serving Chattanooga's community since 1957. All major brands of tires, full service automotive, brakes, alignments, oil changes, and more. QualityTirePros.com. Tell Bo and the crew that Off the Hook Sports and Dave Hooker said hello. This is the next one that I think is the meatiest of the 4 downs, in my opinion.
Tennessee center Cooper Mays here. 3rd down.
All right. Do ESPN and the national media just hate Tennessee?
No. I still don't buy that. I don't think ESPN and the national media hate Tennessee. I think there was a time when Charles Woodson won the Heisman that there was an argument for that, but it was a conglomerate of a few things. It was, and this is where it comes from, but let's just break down the Heisman, and Peyton, and Dave knows this more than anybody because you've talked about it. But let's break down everything that went into that. ESPN and national media in general hate a season-long frontrunner. Is that fair to say, Dave? That's boring. Yes. It doesn't help them at all. So they hate season-long frontrunners. They hate, at the time, they hated the SEC because they didn't have the SEC contract. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
They resented that. And then also, and I know this too, because I know people at ESPN felt that way. Craig James worked at the time. Lee Corso was obviously in his heyday at the time. But from national media perspective, guys, there was a genuine disdain for Philip Fulmer because people really liked Johnny Majors. Because Johnny Majors, whatever else you want to say about him, was the best interview you could possibly have in all of college football. So there was a lot of national media that didn't give Fulmer fair shake.
Okay, let's go way more recent. The Schiano thing. Okay, I doubt Pat Forty goes to bed at night and says a little prayer for the Vols and that they win that night so that things go well in Knoxville. I'm just going to leave it at that. And I've had other reporters come up to me at SEC Media Days that were national reporters, not even regional reporters. They're kind of like, what's that fan base like to deal with? And I'm saying, I think they're fantastic. I think they're passionate. But
that's a fair point.
There are a lot of people. I mean, despite who was right or wrong in this Schiano thing, basically everybody got attacked that said anything positive or neutral, for that matter, about the hire. So,
and Schiano built a lot of allies in the media. I don't know how, but he did. He built a lot of allies.
Yeah, I don't know how either, to be real honest with you. But you're right, he did. And I thought he was, at the time, the most overrated coach on Tennessee's list. I mean, to me, even if, let's take the Paterno stuff out real quick. That's a very average hire.
He lost by 39 points to Butch Jones at Cincinnati his last year at Rutgers.
I mean, that was the most boring. The only thing that made that hire exciting was the Paterno ties.
Well, here's what I think people, and I'll be honest, I called it like 9 months in advance, and again, it's one of the best calls I ever made. By
the way, Caleb, the only person that retweets himself on Twitter when he was right from a month ago. I noticed that over the weekend. Caleb never afraid to pat himself on the back.
I'm very humble, guys. Okay. Yes, what I said about Jimmy, what I said about Greg Schiano was I said that this whole thing could blow up because Jimmy Haslam was making John Curry his puppet and he was strong arming. And all I said, I think a lot of fans knew that and were frustrated because it had come out that Jimmy Haslam was trying to force the Schiano hire through against the wishes of everybody and was forcing John Curry to make this decision. That was a revolt against the Haslams and their feudal lordship over Tennessee more than it was a revolt against Schiano.
Feudal lordship. 4th down, and I'm going to have to call Caleb out, even though I love him. The show, represented by Banks & Jones, Tennessee's trial attorney, they bring you 4th down. Well, it's because they're Tennessee's trial attorney. You can play to win with Banks & Jones because they'll go to trial. You've heard of other lawyers. They say they'll go to trial and fight for you. They won't. They just want to settle. That's the easiest way out. Well, that's not Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones. They won't settle. they'll go to trial for you. Tennessee's trial attorney. They play to win. Truly, Tennessee's trial attorney when it comes to criminal defense or personal injury. Why settle? It's Banks & Jones. T. Scott Jones. BanksandJones.com.
All SEC center Cooper Mays here. 4th down.
All right, I'm going to give you the floor because I think this is crazy in conspiracy theory, and I'm just going to shut it down with a big H to the E double hockey sticks. No. Is there a conspiracy against Tennessee over the NIL lawsuit that they won and made the NCAA look stupid? 10-second answer from Dave is no. I think they were backed by the SEC. I think the NCAA was in power. They wanted to usurp the power. So if anything, I think this would help Tennessee. But make your argument if you wish, sir.
This is one of those where the people that in power are fighting each other. So I'm just going to give you a quick rundown, guys. For those of you who know, I'm a historian. I've covered political news for a long time. And one of the things that's interesting about political news is that most politicians serve their donors, not the people. And there's a bunch of billionaire donors that contribute. But when things get interesting is, Dave, you know this, big businesses, they have conflicting interests sometimes, right?
Yes.
And what makes things really interesting in politics is when the donor class fights amongst each other because they want different things. That's what's happening in college football right now. The donor class, the power brokers, which is the NCAA, and the advertisers and the sponsors all want different things. And right in the middle of that is ESPN and the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, which, Dave, as you know, is somewhat one and the same at this point with the SEC, isn't it? And the NCAA.
Yes.
I mean,
I would say this real quick. If that were the case, if the lawsuit was a factor, the bowl committees still have the ear of the SEC. Tennessee wouldn't have gone to the Citrus Bowl last year if they were some sort of forlorn redheaded stepchild.
No, the lawsuit happened after. The lawsuit happened right after. I think you remember. The lawsuit happened after the Citrus Bowl. They dropped that investigation in February, and Tennessee declared open war on the NCAA.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, I just don't think that happens. I just don't think they're held. I don't think the NIL affects them one way or another.
The question is, well, here's the thing. The question is, if you're ESPN as a network, you think, well, you kind of want NIL, don't you? Because doesn't NIL mean more money spent on advertising? Because players get to get endorsement revenue. Actually,
no. I would argue that no, you would rather that just come in as natural donors, and I would argue that
no, I'm talking about ESPN. If you're the network,
that's debatable.